Okay, so it was my pleasure being with you this morning and hearing the participation and the reports and the questions. Okay, I was a part of the research with Dr. Esperi and Nurse Wang when we looked at the matter of discrimination and stigma and the LGBTIQ population and things like that. And the information that we garnered was very, very important. What made it so good is not just that we actually went out and did desk research, but we actually spoke with persons in the population. We spoke with members of the faith-based organizations, healthcare, legislative, tourism, every industry you can think of. We spoke with persons. So we gained a lot of information about the situation in Antigua and Barbuda. Out of that research, there were a number of recommendations. Public awareness and education campaign. Now, we hear it said all the time, the youth are the future and they are our tomorrow and all these type of things. It's not just a cliche, it's the truth. I know all of us in this room and on Zoom are probably very young and spring chickens, but the point is we're not going to be here forever. And we need persons to continue the good work that have been started by many of you here. So I was the coordinator for the Youth Public Awareness Campaign. And for that campaign, we had 8 activities. So I will share the PowerPoint at this time. Okay, how do I do the share screen? Thank you so much. Okay. Okay. So the title of our one-year presentation was Public Awareness, Public Education and Awareness Campaign on Gender, Sexual Identities and Inclusivity. And we focused on young persons ages 16 to 25. In some instances, we went as high as 29. Why we started at 16 is because in Antigua and Barbuda, the age of consent is 16 years old. And if we start having conversations with our children, I heard somebody made a recommendation that we start in kindergarten. It's a wonderful idea when we're having social science and social studies to talk to younger children. But then when you send them home, there's going to be an uproar with the parents. So we have to have balance, because while we want to educate and share certain information, we have to ensure that parents are on board, because if they're not, then we have a lot of negative publicity, which sort of derails sometimes the progress of the whole program. So progress has to be taken in steps. So we started at age 16 because that's the age of consent and they don't necessarily need parental consent to have certain types of discussions. And the aim was to have to educate them, to hear what they have to say and to see how we can work together. Started in April and we just ended in February 2022. We had 8 activities. We had some focus groups and discussion forums about the lockdown. And we have a lot of persons here from education. Remember the challenges our young people had with data and being on Zoom and all that sort of thing. So we couldn't have as many focus groups as we wanted to, but at least we were able to have some. We had a social media campaign. Our partner for that is Youthrise. They're on the line. We're very grateful. We had a panel discussion with members of the Youth Parliament. We had some educational booklet distributions, public service announcements, video production. We had training and we had a storytelling campaign. For the focus groups, and one of the things I want to say thanks to the many partners that we have in here. We have a lot of helpful persons who share their youth with us, share their expertise, participated very willingly with this program. So we had a total of 8 focus groups with youth from the University of the West Indies, State College, dancers, representative of the LGBTI community, and they were mixed. And during those focus groups, it was really enlightening and sometimes very painful to talk with young persons. asking them questions like, what are some of the things you've observed in your community? And they would talk about at the Antigua State College or at their school, how when somebody appeared to be different, how they would be tortured and traumatized and called names and isolated. And even though some of the young persons in the group, they felt badly, they did not necessarily always want to stand up on the side of the persons being persecuted, because they were sympathetic to that youth, but they did not necessarily feel brave. And you can imagine the internal conflict our youth go through. All of us are different for some reason or the other. It could be our gender, our sexual orientation. It could be the country that we came from. It could be the way we speak. It could be a physical deformity. So for all our young people that we spoke with, they knew what it was to be different, and they were able to share with us. Very idealistic. I know we think all they care about is parties or social media, but what we discovered is that they do want a better Antigua and Barbuda. They do want a safe place to live. They want our politicians to get up and do the right thing. They want our church leaders to not just talk about love, but to practice it. And so they were very direct in the changes they wanted to see. They felt like adults were hypocritical. That's the truth. We get up and we say one thing, but in practice, we don't always do that. And so the focus groups, they talk about the fact that we're sitting in our churches, they're talking about love, but if there's a young person in the church who's different, they're ostracizing that person. Yet we have persons in church who are involved with each other who should not be. And they're not blind. So they recognize our hypocrisy. And so they called for the churches to do things differently, or religious leaders. They spoke a lot about the media, how the media reports certain things, and how certain things are portrayed and the language that is used. They talked a lot about politics, and they had a lot to say about mental health of young people. And when a young person is growing up, and when they're questioning, who am I? Where do I fit into this world? And when they have nowhere to go to say, I feel different, I don't like boys, I don't like girls, and they have nowhere to turn, it impacts their mental health. It impacts their ability to do their schoolwork. Because it's all well and good to say, study your maths and study your economics, but if you sit in here wondering, who am I, where do I fit into the big scheme of things, to look at the holistic side of the youth, and those were some of the discussions that came out. These are some of the youth who participated, and they, of their own volition, came up with some slogans that we can use. All life matters, equality, love, pride. We're here, get used to it, get used to us. And there were some of them are small. I cannot see them, but we can always share them at another time. We're planning to make a slideshow with this. Our second activity was a social media campaign, and Youth Arise were kind enough to host our social media campaign. Youth Arise is a group. They have 956 followers on Facebook, and their mission is to become Antigua and Barbuda's youth powerhouse through aid, public interactions, and creativity. And so every week, we would post something educational, something funny, a YouTube video, anything related to ending discrimination, into minimizing stigma, helping persons to understand the differences. And we would reach a number of persons who would watch our campaign, but a lot of people didn't interact. We noticed that they don't want to publicly click like or share, message or WhatsApp to ask about it. So we still have that situation. While we're speaking about stigma and discrimination, people don't want to publicly comment on certain topics, but they would send private communication. That says something. So we're saying we're saying the previous one, we're saying that we're in a free society, but are we really free when persons feel like I can't express myself or ask a question in the on the public discourse, they have to send a message privately. We had a live Zoom where we talked about the topic. And then at the end of the program, we finished with a peer training workshop. So this was the social media campaign on Facebook and on Instagram. And what we posted were some of the contributions that our youth gave in the focus group. The third activity was a panel discussion. This was held with members of the National Youth Parliament, and we looked at youth sexual diversity in Antigua and Barbuda. Our host was Kadeem Joseph, most of us know him, and we looked at 4 specific aspects. We looked at the media. Gemma, we're always on the media. The media is a very important vehicle. We looked at the education, which somebody talked about earlier. We looked at faith-based organizations, and we looked at the impact of sexual diversity, stigma, discrimination on our youth's mental health. And one of the things, Medical Center as a social worker and counselor. And I never documented the numbers, but we had a number of young persons. Is Harry going to know of it? Because sometimes I would call her. Zara would know of it because sometimes I'd refer them to her. She would get involved. We had a number of young persons coming up to the hospital with self-harm because of their identity, because they felt trapped in their bodies, because they had nobody to speak with, because they were bullied. And so it's a real issue in Antigua and Barbuda. And this panel discussion was very informative. We had some persons in the group with us, and we had some joining us by Zoom. And again, the faith-based organizations came in. So we can clearly see the path we will have to take going forward. We can clearly see, because it's the same set of topics that keep coming up in all the presentations. Those were some of the persons we had there, and those are the panelists. And they put a feature in the Observer after we were finished with the program. The 4th activity, we had an educational booklet distribution. Risa was kind enough to help me with this, and that's when she talked about creativity. I said, I know exactly what she's talking about. This booklet was a collection. She have a lot of skills you all don't know about. This booklet was a combination of stories, poems, songs, and artworks submitted by youth from the LGBTI community and also others. And I don't even think I brought a copy of it. Sorry about that. I should have brought a copy, but we had some artwork in there. We had some poems. We printed, the goal was to print 500 copies to share when we sent it to the printers. Okay. When we sent it to the printers and they recognized that it was a not-for-profit booklet, they asked if they can print some extra for themselves, and they also donated an extra, I think, 25 to us. So that was really, yes, that was really kind. So we were able to share to the persons. We sent some to the State College, the Directorate of Gender Affairs, places where youth would have access to them. The Department of Youth, a couple of private youth foundations in Antigua and Barbuda. We sent to the Aid Secretariat. Mr. David, I hope you have been distributing them. You have yours? Okay, great. The Antigua Planned Parenthood Association. We sent to school counselors and the University of the West Indies. Ms. Handy, did you get your copy? Okay. And our online participants, if you're interested in seeing it, feel free to email us and we can send you a PDF copy, because we have sent some PDF copies to youth organizations that have requested outside of Antigua and Barbuda. You can email me at Korenkardia, KORENKARDIA @hotmail.com. Thank you. Our 5th activity was a public service announcement. We created, with the help of Miss Ariel and her team, a radio PSA, and we also created a video production with the same words. We have a copy of it? We have a copy of it to play. And it was played on the radio stations. We conducted a poll. to ask the young people, where do you listen? What do you listen to most? They said vibes, hits, and TikTok. Yeah, that's what they said. The TikTok, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's what they said. Vibes, hits, and TikTok. So we played it on Vibes and Hits, and we recently got the video PSA made into a TikTok. So we have to figure out how we'll be sharing that TikTok video. We have to, if we're targeting our youth as the key population, then we have to meet them where they are. So they're on Instagram a lot too. I think Facebook now is for the older people. Nobody on Facebook and Twitter? You're still on Facebook. I'm still on Facebook too. Oh my, well, we need to get with the TikTok story. So we also had a video production, which was very, very successful. Did any of you see it on ABS? Okay, it was done. They give us some prime time. So they played it a lot in the evening during the news and the Good Morning Antigua and Barbuda. Thank you so much for that. And two of the participants met with me and they said since they've been on this production, when they go out, people are stopping them and asking them questions. So they're able to answer questions. Let me tell you something. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to get up and do a video on a topic like this in Antigua and Barbuda. It takes a lot of courage. Because the minute you do a video, whether you are or are not, people are going to say that you are. Yeah. Right? So it takes a lot of video. We're grateful to them. And not only did they participate in the video, but they also have been answering questions after when persons approach them about it. You had a question? Right. Yes. Yes, the video is also available for social media and for sharing. And the technology thing. By the next time we have this meeting next year, this time I'll be better into technology. I'll be able to just pop up everything. So yes, that was very, very helpful. And we got a lot of positive feedback about that. Normalizing the conversation. Should it matter who I love? I'm a talented artist. I'm a teacher. I'm doing my part. You know, I'm not committed any crime. Should it really matter who I love? Okay. Yes, I remember that. I remember that. Yes, we don't want to minimize other aspects of a person's life because of how they identify. Our seventh activity was a peer training exercise, which was a trainer of trainer. Again, this answers one of the questions you asked earlier, or I think Dr. Espery talked about it. When we have young persons, who do they listen to? They listen to their peers a lot. And while we do have to enhance the capacity of our education service personnel and our healthcare personnel and our parents, the go-to person for young persons are usually their peers. And so we did some peer training on the topic of, again, gender, sexual identities, and inclusivity. We broke down the terms because there's still a lot people don't always understand. What's the difference between sex and gender? What's the difference between, what are all the letters of the alphabet? What do they mean? And they ask questions like, exactly how many letters are there? Are they up to 27 right now? How many are we at? And so they ask these questions and we have to be able to answer. And they say, where do we go when where do we refer persons? How do you counsel persons? What language do you use when you're counseling? If you're a person, a youth yourself, and another youth approach you and say, this is how I'm feeling. This is what has happened to me. This is what I'm noticing with my parent. How do you guide them? Where do you refer them? And so we looked at topics like that. And 4 persons agreed to continue the training in their particular organizations. And this is something we hope to replicate going forward. And our final activity, thank Ms. Handy for this, she spearheaded the BU campaign. Does anybody here want to be anybody else besides who they are? So we know what it feels like. You want to be able to be genuine, to be comfortable in your skin, to walk into a room and not have to hide, not have to feel any shame. And so we interviewed 5 persons and they were able to give their stories. And these, are they still up on the, I think they're still up, right? Yeah, they're still available. You can check out this campaign. Persons share their stories, what it felt like. Some of the stories are very difficult to read. So it requires a lot. People talked about being sexually assaulted, being put out of their homes, and different things they had to go through as an LGBTI identifying person. Someone said it took a long time to accept who I was. The other story was be loud, be proud, be you. Somebody said they used to call me a little girl or it. And then there was another one in September, and then the last story, there were 6 of them in all. A social services coordinator talked about what it was like to work with persons from the population. And the person who did that story, she is an advocate with WAR as well as a healthcare provider. And so we have some of the stories there. So far, we have surpassed our target of meeting 500 youth. And in Antigua and Barbuda, based on all of the activities. And we also have a plan to complete a mural, which we're hoping to do sometime early in April. And this will be done by some youth from one of the secondary schools who are in an arts class. We've already identified a spot on Factory Road, so we'll tell you more about that as the time comes. COVID was one of the challenges we had to face in executing this program, because you remember we had a whole year of lockdown, but thankfully we were still successful. I want to thank the persons in this group who have participated, and I want to remind all of us that the work is not yet done. One of the things I wanted to highlight was how we were able to engage these youth. We did it by first asking them, what really matters to you? How do you feel? What do you want? Because one of the things the youth complain about is adults coming in with their own agenda and talking down to them. This was a conversation. It was a back and forth conversation. It was not us telling you what to do or telling you what we want. We listened first and foremost. And they were very happy for that, because they said sometimes people don't listen. Parents don't always listen. Teachers don't always listen. And so we asked them, what does it mean to you to be different? And we started off with a conversation of what does different feel like. And they mentioned, okay, the first time I went to Puerto Rico, everybody spoke Spanish and I was the only English-speaking person. The first time I went to Cuba, and then we started to say, okay, so can you imagine being in your own country, in your own home, and having to hide who you are, hide who you speak with, and things like that. And they were able to have some empathy, some understanding, and things like that. We asked them, in what ways have you been violated? In what ways have you been celebrating? And we were able to have the discussion around that. And then the other question we asked, what kind of society do you want to have? What do you want Antigua and Barbuda to be? And we also empowered them. You have a part to play. The way you speak, the way you behave, how you react, whether you join the group who's doing the bullying, and even if you don't have the courage to stand up against it, you can just choose not to be a part of the bullying. I know we want to say, well, silence is complicit, but we can't take it too far, because we still have to think about safety, right? So we had to find a balance. So we said to them, you don't have to join the bullying group. You can choose not to be a part of it until you get the courage to actually do something. And we were able to share with them, these are the places you can go. These are the safe spaces in Antigua and Barbuda. And in the booklet that we created, there's also a space in the back that says who are the counselors you can go to and where the agencies you can go to. So that will also be continued. A lot of them were initially reluctant to engage publicly. they asked, can I just have one-on-one conversation with you instead of the group focus group? And we did some one-on-ones, and then I said to them, okay, we've had the one-on-one, now would you come to the focus group? You can listen, whatever. And so it takes some hand-holding and some support. And the other thing that came out, which I think I mentioned already, they want to see the main institutions in Antigua and Barbuda lead this mission: the churches, the education system, and the media. Those came up. The politics aspect and the legislation came up, but unfortunately they feel like that's not a low-hanging fruit. So what we can start with right now is using the media, the social media and mainstream media. The churches, they really want to see difference in the churches, and the education system. So Ms. Wang, this I guess is part of our mandates going forward. The topic of law enforcement came up from the youth, but not as much. They didn't really want to go down that road that much. Mostly the church, the educational system, and the media. In terms of the sustainability of the project, how will we continue that? The booklet, we're going to be reprinting again. So any of you in here independently wealthy, you're welcome to contribute. The jewelry seller and the jewelry lovers. So you're welcome to contribute to that, but we will be reprinting some more of the booklets. The places that printed the first time have said whatever we come with, they're going to help. The video, we turned it into a TikTok, so I'll be sending it to you because I know you have a very big social media presence. I've sent it to Ike through Kenita. Yes. And we will be sharing it even more. And the training will also be continuing. What will also be continuing as not everything that you'll see. We've had the conversation. You know, sometimes you're sitting in a public area and you hear something and you say, well, I wish I didn't have to hear that. You can't unhear it. So once we start a conversation, it creates a level of awareness. We don't have to solve all the problems in one day. Just having that young person hear something. When you have a conversation, it impacts your brain waves. Your life is never the same again when you're educated about something. Behavior change comes later, but once you hear it, it means something. So let's continue to have the conversation wherever we are, in our private and professional spheres, for everybody represented here. If you don't feel like you're brave enough to have the conversation, then you call in one of us. Workplaces have educational seminars, workshops. You call in somebody from one of the advocate groups. Zara does advocacy, Ms. Wang does advocacy, Ms. Harrigan does it, Senator Francis does it, ordinary, everybody. Call in somebody from, and meet at the church, meet at the school, wherever, and let's have that ongoing conversation. Our goal is not necessarily behavior change. At this point, it's education and awareness. So let's just collectively start somewhere. So thank you so much for your support and your ongoing support, and for putting confidence in us to speak with your young people. We really appreciate it. So thank you very much. There's stuff in the chat? Okay.